Now, I would really like to introduce to you our other speaker, Shri Jayant Kalawar ji. He is a coach and mentor to individuals who are keen on following dharma and doing sadhana while making a successful living in the modern world. Jayant ji sees himself as always having been on a dual track. He has a BTech from IIT Kanpur and an MBA from US Berkeley Haas School of Business, and 35 years of progressively senior US corporate management experience. It is the other track of sadhana and upasana that he has been engaged from a very young age that interests him and has increasingly become his core focus in the last 10 years. Jayantji is learning and is continuing to learn Advaita Vedanta through Chinmaya Mission since the early 1990s. In late 1990s and early 2000s, he conducted Bhagavad Gita groups. He published his first book, Advaita Life Coaching, in 2011. In early 2012, during a visit to his family Kuladevi in Ankola, Karnataka, he was inspired to begin connecting with the Devi. He began daily chanting of Lalita Sahasranama. He coincidentally connected with Amritananda Baba of Devipuram that grounded his sadhana in Ṛtu Vidyā. Jayantji has since then focused his daily practices in a combination of Advaita Vedanta and Ṛtu Vidyā. He began his life coaching practice in 2012, through which he offers coaching mostly to Indian Americans using his daily sadhana as the framework of his coaching. He has also been instrumental in guiding Sinu's understanding on ancient Indian sciences, and he has also penned the foreword to Ṛtu Vidyā. In 2019, he published his second book titled Deconstructing European Enlightenment, which is a view of modernity using the lens of Ṛtu Vidyā and Advaita Vedanta. This is the perspective Jayantji will be using in his keynote address today. Jayantji, I request you to please share with us some of your thoughts.
Thank you, Shravanti. Om Shri Matre Namaha. It is a great honor and a challenge to be asked to give this particular talk on the first day of Sharadiya Navratri. I have long aspired to be accepted by the Devi as her Dasa, and this I see as one more test to see whether I am worthy of that aspiration. Thank you, Sinuji, for asking me to join you here at your book launch. You have done years and years of diligent research and contemplation to write this and gift it all to us. I'm so happy I'm playing a small role here as your cheerleader. Sinuji, in your preface to your book, you have mentioned how men who obviously have never experienced menstrual cycles write about it. Well, here I am. Perhaps you meant to say more than that men not only write about menstrual cycles they have never experienced, they also problematize it and then come up with solutions to the problems they have perceived and modeled. And being an engineer by education and problem solver by profession, just like you are, I love finding problems to solve. So here goes. I see Ṛtu Vidyā as knowledge of cycles that a female human body experiences. Let me explain. As many of you know, Indian knowledge systems develop views of the cosmic architecture. We call them darshanas. The darshanas also include descriptions of subset of cosmos that we inhabit, that we call sthiti. First comes srishti and then comes sthiti. We are in sthiti, which us moderns, we call it space-time now. The darshanas have also developed and made available to us how the human manifestation integrates into this complex web of cosmic cycles. Sinu uses the lens of the darshanas in a book in a compelling way, with a focus on women's physiological cycles. So when Sinu talks of rediscovery of ancient science of menstrual cycles, it is a description of physiological cycles of the female body that are an integral part of cosmic cycles and therefore an integral component of the view of cosmic architecture. With such deep, impactful knowledge being presented in this book, I do hope that it is not just seen as a self-help book intended for English-speaking, reading, urban Indian women. It's much more than that. So my aspirational hope is that Ṛtu Vidyā will be one of the starting points for Indian knowledge systems to begin playing a key influential role in how the emerging artificial intelligence epoch evolves. So to begin with, the question that I would like to explore with you all is how the modern social and economic framework evolved over the last 100 years or so to impact women's health and their roles. Specifically, I want to posit that modernity coming out of Europe over the last 400 years or so has been architected, designed, and deployed to suit the male physiological body. After all, until the 1940s, just about 70 years ago, the modern world, and I have the USA in mind here, expected women to stay at home while women were out and building the world. And men built the world to suit their bodies and their life cycle, not only in terms of spaces like assembly lines and offices and commuter systems, but also in terms of time, always available when required, 24/7, 365. The manifestation of modernity I allude to above is the Industrial Epoch. We are now, as I write this in 2020, perhaps at the end of the second decade of entering into an artificial intelligence epoch. Agricultural-based social and economic structures and processes were transformed, especially in the West, by industrialization in the 19th and 20th century. And in the 21st century, we have begun to experience rapid transformation of that industrial epoch to a digital epoch, driven increasingly by AI activated by very large-scale data. We see some of that in our daily lives directly in how rideshare services such as Uber and Lyft and Ola are managed. So what I want to explore briefly is how the social and economic architecture of modernity was designed and constructed as a projection of the human male body, triggering dysfunction in female bodies. And in my view, the incipient AI epoch may be positioned to rapidly amplify this dysfunctional social and economic architecture. So let me share some of my musings with you. As the framework of modernity was overwhelmingly architected, designed, and built by men over the last 350 years until the end of World War II, women were expected to do their thing at home. Men built out and operated the social and economic systems outside their homes. This included going to war, colonizing, and enslaving non-modern peoples, which is what brought Europeans into India. There were some moves made to give some sort of a role to women in shaping social landscape a few hundred years later. For example, women got voting rights in the early 20th century. The crunch time came during World War II, when women were needed to come out and to work to provide arms, ammunition, trucks, etc., to ensure that the men who went out to war in large numbers had a good chance to be successful. This effort by women, especially in the USA, turned out to be a huge success. After the war in the 1950s, men expected women to go back to their home roles. Many women refused to accept going back. They found roles outside of home more fulfilling. That triggered the feminist movement in the West, starting late 1950s and into the 1960s. The key central issue to whether women should go back to being homemakers or should have roles in the outside world constructed by men was that women were perceived by men to be procreators and nurturers of humans. That is the point at which issues around reproductive rights in general, and more specifically right to abortion choice, arose. The feminist movement succeeded in bringing about some changes to women's role in America, as evidenced by the Roe versus Wade 1973 US Supreme Court decision, declaring constitutional protection of women's right to reproductive choice. But that does not seem to have made much of a dent in women's health issues. I see the reason for continued dysfunction of women's health in the 21st century is that the architecture and design of modern society is still being implicitly driven by considerations of the male physiological body. Female bodies go through different life cycles than male bodies, but are forced to conform with and act like male bodies when they're doing business or working in jobs, other than a few exceptions of roles in which female bodies themselves are a product, for example, modeling, acting, and so on. And yes, of course, the male body design systems and tech companies have come up with solutions for female bodies to adapt to male body driven social and economic architecture so that women get better chance at succeeding in male physiologically friendly world. Menstrual pads were a start. Birth controls were next. Menstrual cycle suppression therapy followed. Many of you probably already know about that, especially those who are competing in the corporate world. And in parallel, we have massive mind control public relations exercise, which completely convinces women that the way to go is to make their bodies behave. Pantsuit is just one signal, like male bodies, if they aspire for equality in economic opportunity and outcomes. Women have been convinced that the way to equality is having the ability to play and behave like males. Frozen eggs, in vitro fertilization, surrogate pregnancies, all are small steps on way to designer humans to be birthed in laboratories and then in boutique human birthing facilities. Female human bodies are actually in the process of being transhumanized. Synthetic biology is waiting in the wings to complete the makeover. At this point, I would like to suggest two thought experiments. Thought experiment one, we start with a blank slate and women lead this thought experiment. What would the social and economic design look like if women were given the chance to lead, or they take up the lead in designing? Would women create spaces for flourishing of their bodies and have male bodies adapt to the female body life cycles? For example, here's an idea. Female bodies take off on days they are menstruating. Male or all non-female bodies do the heavy lifting on those days. Old idea, is it not? But that's just one jumpstart idea under this thought experiment. I posit that the problem-solving directions and technologies that will evolve in such a women-first social and economic architecture may likely be quite different from technologies and tools at play today. Let me go to a thought experiment two, which is the direction I think we may be headed in. We let scientists and technologists from the current male body-centric architecture lead the way to a non-binary, gender-neutral architecture with technology, especially a combination of AI and biotech, enabling choice of a range of possibilities for bodies that humans can inhabit. Notice by saying this, I'm implicitly saying that the property of being human is independent of the body humans inhabit. Now, that may be considered a big jump in some cultural contexts. On the other hand, from within the Indian knowledge systems, Advaita Vedanta teaches being human is not the body, not the mind, nor the intellect. It is the property of sentience. Being human is sentience, the ability of being aware of one's existence and the ability to develop identity based on that sentience through attachment and acting out that we perceive ourselves as being not self. From this lens, transhumanness may be considered par for the course. In this transhumanizing thought experiment, one can proceed from current state of male body-centric social and economic design to something that makes the male-female categories irrelevant. With this thought experiment, one does not have to pit women against men or campaign for women first, as we did in the first thought experiment. Advaita Vedanta helps break down mental models that we have come to accept as truth and opens the door to exploring beyond meanings encapsulated in language based on sensory perception. Now let's briefly consider Ṛtu Vidyā, the knowledge system that teaches that cosmic sentience plays through the physical human body through a layer of 7 nodes, 7 chakras, in a subtle vibrational network of nerves. In my book published in 2019, titled Deconstructing European Enlightenment, I have described how the efficacy of human channeling of cosmic sentience by humans is contingent to a significant degree on the culture, the samskruti, in which the human is nurtured. I have also described how the materialist culture of modernity that arose in Europe about 500 years ago has truncated development of humans down to just the first 3 chakras of the 7 chakras. From within that framework, I see the dysfunctions we experience in our lives today correspond to the unfulfilled potential of our 4th chakra, which gives us the capacity for compassion and courage. The 5th chakra, the capacity to articulate and communicate with empathy. The 6th chakra, which syncs us with the sentience of Mother Earth. And the 7th chakra, which syncs us with the cosmos. Having made my arguments on the 2 thought experiments I proposed, let me step back and get back to ground level where we are now. I see that is the same materialist culture of modernity that is laying the foundation for the new epoch of data-driven artificial intelligence. So the question that comes up in my mind is whether the trend towards this design, which will project the first 3 chakras of the male human body, is likely to accelerate with AI. And with it, we may experience rapid increase in dysfunction as humans fall more and more out of sync with cosmic cycles. Some of this, I believe, we are already experiencing in the USA. And all that I have said so far has been a workup to the points I'm now going to offer. The out of sync cycles that I speak about are directly experienced by all of us, whether males or females or gender neutral. The daily metabolic cycle, for example, when due to pressures of school, work, and business, our frequency and habits of what we consume are no longer in sync with our metabolic cycle. Our waking, sleeping patterns are no longer in sync with our circadian cycle. Both the metabolic and circadian cycles are directly tied to the powerful cycle of Earth's rotation, its perambulation in the presence of the sun. Then there is the lunar cycle, which is really a complex interaction between the Earth, sun, and the moon, which gives rise to Rahu and Ketu, the dynamic nodes which periodically are experienced as eclipses in our sensory perception. That complex and powerful energy cycle is reflected in many ways on Earth and most visibly among female bodies among humans. And that is the synchronicity of the human female cycle with the cosmic lunar cycle that has long been disrupted. And then there is the annual sun cycle, which gives us the seasons, which changes as the seasons change and shows on Earth and we experience through the Earth. Our ancestors taught us ways to live in cosmic synchronicity with each of these cycles. Ṛtu Vidyā shows us the principles that were used to design the practices to ensure human female cycles were in sync with powerful cosmic cycles. My sense is that for humans to begin understanding and be in sync with all these cycles, not just the lunar cycles, the focus may have to be to open up the 4th to 6th chakras that I've spoken about in many human bodies. And as I've said before, the culture, the samskruti in which humans are raised plays a major role in shaping the process of opening of chakras, of making of wise humans. So how did our ancestors help shape our culture based on their insights of human connection with cosmic cycles? I.C. Sinu Joseph's book, Ṛtu Vidyā, gives us clues and evidence. The clues are in the practices that were embedded in social family behaviors to ensure women's health by ensuring syncing their menstrual cycles with work roles they were expected to play. The evidence is that the practice continued to be followed, which can be tested to see whether following such practices help women have better reproductive health. There is also one other key point I would like to offer here. I do not see the evidence of practice as being a reason for mimicking that particular practice itself as we enter into the AI epoch. Those practices do give us clues to underlying principles, the insights, the shrutis that our rishis gave us. It was these insights that were used to design and deploy particular practices, which were amenable to specific deshikala paristhiti. Just like we use physics and thermodynamics, the underlying principles of physics and thermodynamics, to design, whether it's a steam engine or a petrol engine or now a EV platform, so also the same principles can and may be used to design practices for different epochs. Particularly, Shastra's systematized knowledge based on the principles, Shruti, need to be understood and adapted through design to changes in the Deshikala Paristhiti. Deshikal is space-time, Paristhiti is the particular sthiti at a particular time in the epoch. The emerging AI epoch is different from agricultural epoch. It is going to be different from the industrial epoch. Practices designed on Shrutis for the agricultural epoch may need to be redesigned using the same Shruti-based principles for the AI epoch. I know I'm repeating, but that is a key point. We cannot go back into our civilization. We have to go ahead with it, with our principles, influence this civilization now, and go through it and take it over. That is a much more challenging aspiration than attempting to go back. How should Ṛtu Vidyā be applied in the current times? I suggest that should be a central question to be considered, with women taking an active lead in designing and deploying structures and processes with a central focus on women's health and well-being. So to me, a central takeaway from the book Ṛtu Vidyā is that demanding and getting equal economic rights on structures and processes designed by men may be detrimental to women's health, as it forces women to adapt their life cycles to a male-centric world. And through secondary effect, it is detrimental to children and families. What is required, much more than just seats for women at the board table, is active leadership and participation by women who are wise, spiritually mature, with 6 chakras active in the making of villages, towns, cities, schools, businesses, and governments, and systems and technologies that humans have shown they're capable of designing and deploying, and therefore to lead to a much more balanced and helpful vision. And such active leadership and participation by wise women would require them to be deeply informed by the principles of cosmic synchronicity that I've spoken of earlier. In turn, that would require women leaders who take up such a task, be those with all 6 chakras open and channeling the Devi's blessings. I believe Indian knowledge systems, especially perhaps a combination of Advaita Vedanta, which would help to deconstruct the current mental models we have, thus making the way for the higher chakras to begin opening up, and Sri Vidya, with its practices for directly connecting with the Devi to open up the chakras, may offer paths to manifest such wise women leaders amongst us. I ask you to join me today in seeking Sri Durga Devi's blessings on this first day of Sharadiya Navratri to give young women leaders such as Sindhu Joseph, Sahana Singh, and Shravanti Murali inspiration, guidance, and fearlessness and wisdom to forge such a path to produce many Divya, wise women leaders. You may join me if you know the first few words of Durga Batisa. Om Durga, Durga Tishamani, Durga Padvi Nivarini, Durga Machedini, Durga Sadhini, Durga Nashini. Durga Batisa gives you fearlessness. Om Shri Matre Namaha. Thank you, and over to you, Shravanti.